And good afternoon, Secretary Atalig. Thank you once again for joining us. Can I ask our counsel to put up the video from the last hearing? So, Secretary Atalig, at the Special Committee's first hearing with you on May 13, you provided the following answer to our question about COVID-19 pay for cabinet members.
And then to answer your question about any cabinet members or any directors, in a disaster, if they are approved with a
Can we turn up the volume, please?
form and they're providing hours in the emergency being reassigned outside of their current duties, then they are qualified to get paid overtime. However, my office
Can you
has
start?
not
I'm
paid
sorry.
them,
Could you start from?
outside of those frontline workers.
One, right, 104, yeah, 105, 40, 44. There, that's fine.
Is straight time and overtime at 1.5. There's no 2.5 is what we've heard all throughout U2. And then to answer your question about any cabinet members or any directors, in a disaster, if they are approved with a Cat B form and they're providing hours in the emergency being reassigned outside of their current duties, then they are qualified to get paid overtime. However, my office has not paid them, paid anyone outside of those frontline workers and probably lower level directors and managers for overtime. And for those cabinet members working many hours, we only paid them 16 hours at 1.0. So basically, it's like instead of exempting them from the austerity, the CARES Act provided the funding and approval for the reassignment to their duties for the 16 hours above 64 hours at 1.0.
So to be clear then, no cabinet members are getting paid overtime.
That's correct.
And then were you
Okay,
saying
we can
CARES
stop
Act
now.
money, not FEMA money,
So, Mr. Secretary, on May 13, you said that cabinet members who had been reassigned were only getting paid up to 16 hours and no overtime. And so that, like, no overtime, that is in excess of 80 hours. And the governor and lieutenant governor came out with statements as well, stating that cabinet members had not been getting overtime. But the records that we've received show that a number of cabinet members did indeed receive overtime, well over the 16 hours of COVID pay that you had indicated was the limit. You know, we see Secretary Adda from DPW received regular pay at 64 hours from April through May, and in the same time period received additional COVID pay from 75 to 111 hours. Special Assistant Gerald De Leon Guerrero, regular pay at 64 hours, COVID pay anywhere from 143 to 163 hours for the same period. Secretary Hunter, same thing, regular pay at 64 hours, COVID pay anywhere from 30 to 46 hours. And the list goes on. And it appears that you were the only cabinet member actually that capped your COVID pay at 16 hours. Would you clarify your position and the administration's position with respect to overtime for cabinet members? Were you not aware that these payments were being made, or were facts misrepresented to this body and to the public? What happened?
Well, your third option was not at all intended to misrepresent this body with any information I shared. At the time, and it was interesting rewatching that, at the time, that wasn't my understanding, and if you looked at my records, it's only at 16 hours. Now, the process of these overtime payments goes through Homeland to make the requests in order to get any time above the 64 hours, Homeland makes the request to OPM, and OPM processes a NOPA, and then when all those are signed and approved, then our payroll department, our payroll section that gives them the authorization to pay any time, overtime or additional pay. And now I don't see every payroll and every time sheet of this government, but I assumed at the time that that's what the process is.
And the process that you described on May 13, did you specifically give instructions to your staff and payroll to process the COVID pay for cabinet members and other appointed officials in the way that you stated it should be processed?
No, not exactly the way you described. I did share with them that nothing gets paid without a NOPA and has a proper Cat B form. That gives the authorization and gives us the documentation to seek reimbursement for any overtime pay or additional pay.
So now that you know that there have been appointed officials who received well in excess of the 16-hour limit that you had stated on May 13, is there any action that you intend to take or the administration intends to take to correct that?
Well, I believe that Homeland Security, working with the GAR and the PA office, is insured, or initially ensured, that those hours that we pay will be reimbursable. If they're reimbursable, and has the authority through the NOPA and processed through our processes, then if they claimed more than, which I wasn't aware that they claimed more than the 16 hours, then those went through. I don't see every check, every payroll for every employee before it happens. I learned after the fact.
Sure, but in terms of reimbursement, both FEMA as well as the GAR yesterday, who was also with the Public Assistance Office, confirmed that overtime payments, these extra payments, if they are in violation of any CNMI policy or federal policy for that matter, they're not reimbursable. And the GAR had indicated that we would instead try to seek reimbursement through other sources other than FEMA, or it would be absorbed by the CNMI. Is that your understanding as well?
That's correct.
And so in the event that we are not going to get reimbursed for this, what do you estimate will be the Commonwealth's liability for these payments?
Actually, I do not have an estimate at this time, but I'm pretty confident all the expenditures that we listed and all the payroll payments will be reimbursable.
Have you consulted with legal counsel prior to the issuance of any overtime for appointed officials?
No, ma'am.
Did the Attorney General ever at any point share with you his legal opinion of January 2020 regarding the payment of overtime or emergency pay?
No.
Have you read it?
No, I haven't.
Are you aware that he found that there is no legal basis for the payment of overtime or emergency pay to cabinet members?
From what I read in the papers and what I've heard from you and other members, but not directly from the AG or from OPA.
When you first heard that there was an opinion, though, did you try to get one from the AG for yourself?
No, I seek the administration, and I was assured that I would get a copy, but to date I have not followed up to get the copy.
Mm-hmm.
So I have no idea, and I've never read the opinion.
But no guidance for your own office?
No.
Don't you have an assistant AG assigned to you?
Yes, I do. Actually, I have two, for procurement and for tax.
And neither of them provided guidance on this matter?
No, ma'am.
Okay. I realize my time is probably up, Mr. Chairman, but I do have other questions, and I yield for now.
Thank you, Rivers. Sablan. Does anyone have any further? Okay, if none, you can proceed for the second round.
Okay then, very well, thank you. And so just to be clear on the terms, Mr. Secretary, so we understand overtime to be any paid that's for work above 80 hours. And whether it's 1.0 or 1.5, whatever the rate might be, but if they're working in excess of 80 hours and getting paid for that, then that would be overtime. Would you agree?
If it's stated that 80 after 80 hours is overtime, and if that's defined that way as you're mentioning, then I would agree. In terms of payment and what the rate is, overtime to me is 1.5 or more.
So then what do you call it when cabinet members have gone in excess of 80 hours and gotten compensated for that?
That's additional pay.
That's just additional pay.
That's
I see.
correct.
And dual compensation would be double pay, correct? Pay for two jobs for the same periods of time worked?
If it's the same rate, then by definition it is dual.
Well, I mean, regardless of the rate, if they're getting paid to do two different jobs for the same periods, that's double pay, correct?
Sure.
Okay, so given that the Attorney General has said that there is no, excuse me, legal basis for overtime to cabinet members, do you acknowledge that overtime has been paid illegally then to cabinet members?
I cannot make that conclusion that it's illegal or not until, I mean, I can't answer the way you're trying to ask me to
Until you
agree
see
to.
the opinion and get some legal advice.
That's correct.
Okay, I will send you the opinion, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
It seems like very few people have actually seen that opinion. Who need to see that opinion? Did any government employee receive dual compensation then? Paychecks for two jobs for the same periods of work?
I believe in the beginning I was controlling that and only paid above the admin leave of 64 hours, anything above that, and I was allowing for that in the early stages of COVID. After a few weeks has passed and other compensation requests or requests for payments in terms of overtime or additional pay, I was informed when I started to see the numbers of how much we've paid, and those were double pay for all COVID frontliners and everyone that worked.
So people were receiving two checks, even after they came back from admin leave, they were receiving two checks for their regular pay as well as COVID pay.
If they came back from admin leave, it was not considered admin leave, it was considered hours worked.
Right.
And then in addition to that, they were getting a COVID pay.
So they were getting double pay.
That's correct.
Did you consult with legal counsel prior to authorizing that dual compensation?
No, I did not consult any legal counsel of whatever for anything relating to COVID, other than purchases that needs to go through the Attorney General's office.
Did any cabinet members receive dual compensation, paychecks for two jobs for the same periods of work?
As you define it, yes.
Are you aware that there is existing Commonwealth policy in the personnel system rules and regulations
I am
against
aware now.
dual compensation? Are you aware that salaries of cabinet members are capped by law?
I'm aware now.
So what was the legal basis then? Or any basis for providing dual compensation?
The basis was based on previous disasters and what FEMA, as what I understood, FEMA will reimburse, and the PA office. So I tried to keep that at a minimum with that understanding of what is allowable and what is not allowable. If it's not allowable, and in this case, if it's not any positions directly involved in the actual COVID-19 mitigation and response, then that is not considered reimbursable to FEMA. In my understanding, I am not the PA and I'm not the GAR, but my understanding from readings and trying to get an understanding of the processes, I tried to keep that at a minimum. If I allowed it, I knew that it was not going to be something we would request from FEMA.
So who would you request it from then?
Well, we would
How would you
we
cover
would
that?
go through the same process as if we're going to compensate them for for reimbursements, and then, however, the funding source would be different from what we would use to show reimbursement requests to FEMA.
But if you know now that FEMA will not reimburse for disallowable costs such as illegal overtime or dual compensation, then that would have to be a cost absorbed by the Commonwealth, unless we were to recover those costs.
That's correct.
Okay. Is dual compensation still being paid to any government employee?
For those at the quarantine sites, yes.
Is dual compensation still being paid to cabinet members?
I do not believe so.
Now that you know that there may be problems with dual compensation, will you take any action to correct that?
I will seek legal advice on that.
And finally, for this line of questioning, you earlier indicated, actually in our May 13 hearing, that additional COVID pay would be covered by CARES Act funds, not by FEMA. Do you know for certain whether these are allowable expenses under the CARES Act? And if there is no legal basis in the Commonwealth for overtime or dual compensation to cabinet members?
Yes, it is. If you're talking about the CARES Act, the Corona Relief Fund, it is an authorized or allowable expense.
Even if it's in violation of CNMI policy? Have you had that reviewed by legal counsel or verified that with U.S.
I will
Treasury?
repeat, I never sought legal counsel for anything related to COVID-19. Now, I will seek legal counsel in the questionings you're asking me to verify. If we're talking about Corona Relief Fund under the CARES Act that we get for states and territories, and you're asking me if it was allowable, it is allowable. Based on the guidelines and based on three calls, all 50 states and territories have a conference call with the U.S. Treasury where many states and territories have Q&A, and those are issues that are vetted out and discussed with the U.S. Treasury. U.S. Treasury always comes up with an updated version of their what's allowed and what allowed, because this is fairly new to them as well. And so their first guidelines said allowed what is allowable expenses and what are costs that's not allowable. Then they've updated where they did allow things. For example, in the initial release of Q&As for the Corona Relief Funds, they said you cannot use funds that you cannot use these Corona Relief Funds as matching for any other federal assistance. In their second release, it is allowable. So things are changing as well in the federal government. The latest update is that they will now allow states and territories to use these funds for, they're making it a lot more flexible.
Sure, I understand that, but sorry to cut you off, but has U.S. Treasury explicitly stated that dual compensation for government employees is allowable?
Of course not.
They have not. Okay. And so finally, would you just comment then on the policy and the fairness of furloughing hundreds of government employees and at the same time paying out unauthorized overtime and double pay for cabinet members and others who have been selected for this additional pay?
Can you repeat that? That was a fairly long question.
Would you comment on the fairness of furloughing hundreds of government employees while at the same time paying overtime and double pay to cabinet members?
Yes, I can comment to say that the reasons and the purposes of furlough was due to our budget issues in the general fund. Compensation for for the COVID response is not general fund. And therefore, that's kind of two separate issues.
Okay, but just so we're clear, CNMI still has to pay up front even in the event of getting reimbursed, correct?
That's correct.
And the records show that we are both paying out of the general fund for regular pay, as well as at the same time paying overtime and extra pay or double pay out of COVID funds. So from my perspective, there is nothing fair about that process. And I'm wondering how the administration can justify that.
I'll speak for myself, and I answered your question. I'm not speaking for the administration or for the decision makers that made their decisions in the different departments. I just know that our revenues is projected to be 48% less than what was originally budgeted for, and as a government, we needed to do something. I recommended that we trim down the size of our government, and the biggest category of our budget is personnel, unfortunately. My recommendations were not furlough or RIF. It was we're going to get to a point where we're going to go to 40 hours a week if we needed to. If that's I gave options to the administration, and then decisions were made.
Thank you, Secretary Atalig. I yield.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. Okay, let me recognize Rep. Lipon.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, I got this morning from the Chairman, and this is pertaining to the July 16 letter regarding the check registry. I'm kind of lost here in the hours work, and maybe you can enlighten me. This hours work, is this for COVID-19? For regular hours? Yeah. This is the regular, but when if this is regular and I'm seeing the charge out business unit, when you look at this charge out business unit, Secretary, there's one particular individual, there's multiple different charge out for business unit. Is this where those funding were coming from?
Yes, the business unit identifies which account they're being paid from.
So, in particular to anyone on this list, you identify which one to pay them out, right?
Yes.
And these are their regular work hours?
If you're looking at what I submitted based on the committee's request for the regular pay check registry.
Yeah. Because I wanted to identify how much, when you say 16 hours is the limit for them to be working for the COVID task force, right?
Well, this was for pay periods 8 through 15, and majority of the COVID was earlier pay periods.
Oh, okay.
But but if you have questions directly to it, I can try to answer.
But currently, are there reflections of the COVID in this list?
In this list, let me check. 1699J is the business unit that you need to look for, and that's the.
That's the COVID related, right?
Right.
Okay.
So far, I don't see anything on this.
Yeah, and I'm wondering whether we got the right information.
No,
anyways,
sorry, Secretary. The information we requested is to get the regular payroll, and I believe that's what I handed out earlier, because that does mention which business units, and that's what you're looking at. It's not the COVID pay.
Oh, okay.
So this is the regular hour worked for regular time.
Okay. Secretary, I know that Vicky alluded how much we submitted for FEMA reimbursement and how much was already paid out. Currently, do you have the actual number of how much payable we still owe for COVID-related that's pending for payment?
COVID related,
Yeah.
other than the large contracts, which
Yeah.
we haven't paid because we're waiting for direct payment from FEMA, most of the vendors have been getting paid. There's some, whether there's some issues with the contract or issues, or it hasn't gone through the complete process, then it's probably still sitting in payables.
Because there's one package here that was shared that it's showing $63 million, $63.9 million still maybe unsettled, not yet paid, because I don't know which one is paid and which one is not. It's just listing down the vendor description and the amount. So, what I'm trying to get a clear picture is how much has been paid out, how much is still pending, how much is yet to be submitted for FEMA for reimbursement.
Well, as the GAR reported yesterday, what was submitted already to FEMA for requests for awards is $48.3 million. I believe you guys got this copy yesterday from him. So $48.3 million has been submitted to FEMA.
And that's up to
As of July 24th.
So all this reimbursement would come directly to finance, right?
Yes,
And then that's when you disbursed out the funding to respective vendors, right?
that's correct.
And
Or a reimbursement to our general fund
so,
if we paid it already in advance.
so some of it you paid it in advance,
That's
right?
correct.
But the ones that are not, those are being timely paid out, right?
That's correct.
So we're not going to experience anything such as the U2 related issue with payment for COVID-19.
I hope not.
That's why I'm asking you this question.
But we're doing our best to work with Homeland and working our best to work with the task force to try to control and minimize our expenditures because we don't know how long this will go. The CARES Act funding lasts up to December 30. And after that, any unused money of the CARES Corona relief funds will need to be returned back to the U.S. Treasury, which I am 100% confident that will not happen.
I'm pretty sure that there's means to spend this to COVID related issue here in the island and respective islands. Last but not least, Mr. Secretary, I asked, how the procurement process was done with both the Homeland Security and GAR, and knowing that the procurement and supply falls under your umbrella. Does the officer in charge or the acting capacity down at procurement, do you communicate as to when purchase requisition are submitted? Does he share it with you to go over with or not?
Not every PR, but
No, let's say in a huge amount.
yes, he does.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary. I'll yield for this time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank Ripley. Chair recognizes the floor.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome again back, Secretary of Finance. Just a follow-up questions on the line of questions from Lipon. How much left over right now from the CARES Act do we have? How much has been used already for COVID-19? I know that you mentioned earlier that the CARES Act funding is only good till December of this year, But do you have the figures on how many has been exhausted already or been used for this pandemic?
Yes, I do. If you give me a moment. Um, the way I did my report, I'm looking for total how much we spent for the coronavirus pandemic. We have spent. Well, keep in mind, I got $13.1 million in actual dollars spent out as of 7/20, but we have obligations that are still pending payment and just scheduled for payment with through our payable process of another $26 million.
26 million process pending. So in total, we pretty much are in process and have actual paid out is somewhere in the tune of 39.1. So the balance now for COVID-19 would be, what is the figure now?
We have 26 million yet to pay from a total. Okay, so we got $36 million from the CARES Act, and we identified $8 million from other sources within the government, and so a total of $44 million was available for this pandemic.
Okay, so the 8 million that you're saying as other sources, what source of funding are these?
And so with these are sources from other agencies that I was able to communicate and have them transfer to the general fund or to the specific account for the CARES Act. I mean, for the coronavirus is $2 million from the Commonwealth Casino Commission and $6 million from CDA.
Thank you for that response. You for now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Flor. Let me recognize Rep. Probst for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Atalig, thank you again for coming in. I know you've been attending everything pretty much, so we appreciate your time. I know you're a very busy man, so we appreciate it. I just wanted to comment on, we do understand that there was a need to furlough employees because of the funding. You had mentioned that and everything. I think the frustration, as you heard in the previous hearings, that the frustration was how they were furloughed, one of the things that was brought up. And the subject is how, even with Director Salas, that it should be first in, last out. That wasn't followed. And I know that's not really your decision to make. But what is concerning to a lot of those who were furloughed, aside from how they felt frustrated at how they were selected, the selection process, which they felt was wrong, and it seems to be wrong, is the fact that, given the fact that we had to reduce the budget because we are short on funds, we have now returned several agencies to 80 hours. And I think that is the frustration that a lot of our constituents feel, that we were at 64 hours because of this, the lack of funds. But now we're seeing departments and agencies going back to 80 hours. So I want to express that on behalf of our constituents who have reached out to so many of us on that part. But it's also confusing that would even happen. I want to just give an example, and please, you can help me out here. I had complaints also from the Department of Public Lands. Now, originally, correct me if I'm wrong, the Department of Public Lands was following austerity during the austerity time. They were working 64 hours. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Thank
yes.
you. And then So what had happened was they furloughed their employees, several employees, and then they went back to 80 hours. Is that correct? I believe.
You know, I don't know who, if and how many furloughs from the Department of Public Lands.
And that's just one of several departments that has done that. So you have to understand the frustration that they are feeling from that. But other important departments and agencies are still at 64 hours. The Office of the Public Auditor, which has tremendous work to do with all their investigations and all the things that they're doing, is still at 64 hours. And I believe the Northern Miners College is also at 64 hours. So it's just, there is frustration from across the board. And so I wanted to convey that to you with regard to what we hear from our constituents. So that's not so much of a question, but more of a concern that I wanted to address to you. The other thing, this is a question. With regard to the CARES Act funding, is this money flexible? Could this money be used, for example, to be utilized for disaster food stamps?
The overall corona relief funds?
Yeah.
If the state chooses to do so, yes,
Okay.
it's allowable.
But that would be the decision to be made by the governor or the administration?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And the reason why I bring this up is because we do know that we have a lot of families that are struggling, that haven't seen really the benefit of this. And although we are expecting PUA, right, that's going to be coming out soon, those families will be taken care of eventually. But we have a lot of families that won't receive any federal funding. And I think that's the biggest heartache that we're facing right now. We do understand the struggle with the fact that guest workers are not able to avail of the PUA funds. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah. So the reason why I ask this, and I know you have tremendous influence in the administration, is that if you could help support this need for assistance for food. It's a very basic need, and it's a necessity, because what we're finding is there are families who are not just being evicted or on the verge of being evicted, but they are looking at how are they going to get their next meal. I've had heartbreaking conversations with families. It's a very emotional thing. So we, from the legislature, from talking with my colleagues, are hoping that the administration would be willing to do something like this. If they could set aside money to assist for disaster food stamps. We had this after U2, and it was tremendous. In fact, if everybody remembers, everybody went out to the store and bought food, and it was a wonderful thing. I just know that the nonprofits like CareDot and Empty Vessel Ministry have difficulty in sustaining their food banks, and the importance of, if this economy, because this pandemic, as I mentioned to Gar Patrick Guerrero, that we don't know what the future has in stake for us. We don't know how long this is going to be. So food is definitely going to be something that we have to be considering in putting money aside or something, because God forbid if things don't improve, and we're going to have to open up soup kitchens or something like that in every village to help people out, just to be able to eat. We do see that these, thankfully, the schools that are open, that cars, and families are able to pull up and pick up food, has been very successful and very helpful. But there is still a greater need for those who do not have access to that. So I hope for your support and indulgence with that. Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you, Rep. Did you need a response or just a comment? Okay. Let me ask a question, and I want to get you out by 3 o'clock. So, with regards to your May letter or release letter on how the funding or expenditure plan for COVID operations, um, who was involved in putting the $36 million spending plan together? It was just you, and is it the administration? Because we weren't involved in any of this.
So that was just a projected spending plan.
Right.
It's not set in stone. I came up with the idea. I was preparing myself, not knowing what IRS or U.S. Treasury needed to receive the 36 million. So I prepared that plan, in which I shared to the governor and lieutenant governor, and they said that's good in terms of if I needed to submit that to U.S. Treasury. Now, the case is I did not need to submit that to U.S. Treasury. However, it was a spending plan, just preparing for what documentations I needed to justify for us to receive the $36 million.
Okay, because in line with Rep. Probst's question, because none of these funds were even discussed. We're setting aside funds for I guess people that couldn't pay their rentals for one, small businesses that needed help, and I know like Guam was able to set aside a specific amount, I believe in the amount of 10 million for small businesses. In what Rep. Probst saying, food, none of this was ever discussed in the executive level in planning how the funds, and knowing the fact now that CARES Act was very lenient and it allowed for those kind of expenditures. This was never brought up.
Thanks, Chairman. The CARES Act funds, the Corona Relief Funds for the states and territories, is under my control, and you are right. It wasn't. There was no real. My main concern, there was no real planning in terms of different programs or subsidizing areas. My concern was I knew that we were spending to protect our borders, to protect our residents from this pandemic. I knew it was costly. I did see those big, large contracts and the hotels, and I always wanted to make sure that I had something for us at the Commonwealth level to reserve, so to speak, because we have till December 30 or the allowable expenditure time. And if I use it all up in May or use it up in June and and a second wave comes or something, what are we going to do? And so I've been kind of holding on to the money. Now, it's hard to compare to other territories and states because we only got $36 million. Guam received $140 million for the same pot under this Corona relief. And so it's a big difference. If I had $140 million to be able to assist us with this pandemic, I think we'll be able to help our residents a lot more than we haven't done so far. But $36 million compared to what I was seeing in the spend rate to protect our Commonwealth with this pandemic, I needed to. I've been meeting with different departments and knowing what I studied the CARES Act. I tried asking them, can you go reach out? There's a section here. Go and get this grant out of the CARES Act so that it can minimize the reliance on the general fund or the reliance on the Corona Relief Fund. So to answer your question, there was no direction or even suggestions because I kept this money tight, knowing our expenditures and upcoming expenditures. And so, yeah, there was no conversation between the governor and myself about really how to spend this. I said, we got this money. I'm holding this money to take care of our expenses as we continue this pandemic, this fight against this pandemic in our islands.
Well, thank you for that clarification, and I know we will be deliberating in a couple of days with regards to the community disaster loan. This is something the legislature or this body, because since we appropriate, we're involved mostly in appropriating, and we want to be involved in this because there needs to be planning out on how to help. There's a lot of businesses closing down. There's a lot of people losing jobs. There's a lot of people losing homes. Might be out on the street, might not be able to eat. So this is something that, if this body does approve, it's something that we need to really sit down and have a roadmap for next year, because I don't see any improvement with regards to tourism in the next couple of months. It's all, estimates, and we would like to see them back, but the U.S. just came. I believe sports will be shut down possibly with the second wave of, and it's happening right now with one major league team that 14 members of their baseball team had COVID. So, that's something that we need to prepare for in the next, couple of months before next year, and that's something that we're very concerned. Members, I have other questions. I believe I'll relieve Mr. Atalig by 3 o'clock. I want to get the CACC in because it's going to be a long day. I will, if there is only simple questions, I'll allow it, but we can always bring back Mr. Atalig here for further clarification. I believe he'll be here in a couple of days to discuss the CDL, and this is a lot of it, but might be in the same time. So with that, I'll recognize Lipon, and then yours is quick. Okay, so we'll get out and we'll get CACC in real quick. So I'll yield to you, Reverend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, you said you found $8 million, and I wanted to figure out this $6 million from CDA from what is this $6 million?
I believe it's from their interests of interest in CIP interest or something. I don't know exact fund. Well, I seeked out all agencies, all departments, or component units, autonomous agencies, seeking funding to how we're gonna need funds to fight this pandemic. We didn't. If the CARES Act didn't come, we're gonna be.
Can you get back with us as to
Yes.
the exact? The other thing, this $2 million.
Yes.
Is this the regulatory fee?
It is.
Under whose authority did you get this from?
The executive directive. I mean, the executive order that gave me the.
I mean, from CCC. Who gave you the approval?
Mr. De Leon Guerrero.
Did he seek the board, the
We,
commission?
He seeked.
Because I think that by virtue of the regulation, it is the chairman of the Casino Commission that is authorized to release, not the executive director.
I do not know if it was from their end. I sent out letters requesting for availability to be transferred, and that was the response. And
Can you
told me
follow up on
what
that?
and what was available, and the $2 million was available, and I took it.
I would appreciate if you can get the details
Yeah.
as to who.
I can give you our communication.
Okay. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Rep. Lee. Rep. Sablan, Tina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a quick comment and then a question. Your statement, Mr. Secretary, that we only got $36 million out of the CARES Act, I think just further underscores the need to use those funds wisely and carefully, and not to use these limited funds for illegal overtime or double pay, but to address the real human suffering that you've heard the members here describe, for which these funds are intended. When we have families that are struggling to put food on the table, keep a roof over their heads, and we have businesses that are on the verge of shutting down, these funds could be used to provide relief. And I would urge you strongly to reconsider this spending plan that allows, whatever plan is guiding you at this point, that allows the use of these funds for double pay. My question for you is, how many agencies and departments are still operating at 64 hours?
I believe everyone needs to be operating in 64 hours. That's the current directive. Now, the exception to that is for those agencies that are able to find external funding or federal funds that they can shift at least 20% of their of a person's workload to the grant. They could be working on the Fridays for that grant, which is 20% on, which is equivalent to the 16 hours. So if you have a grant that's able to pay for it, or if you are on a federal grant, you're a federal grant employee, you are authorized to work on the grant for 80 hours.
Okay, so
So
that
big-
should be the exception rather than the rule?
That's correct.
But, okay, so the governor's office is back to 80 hours, correct? Finance is back to 80 hours.
Finance,
The legislature,
finance is other than customs is back to 80 hours in terms of because we have federal grants that we're able to subsidize up to September 30.
okay, so it's not uniform then, like some agencies might have some staff that are still
Yes.
working full 80 hours or overtime.
And some are still at 64.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you, members. And thank you, Secretary. You are excused, and should this committee request your presence again, we appreciate that you come back.
Thank you, members, for allowing me to speak.
Thank you.